Today we are looking in our series of calling out to God. We're looking at Nehemiah. Brad read that passage for us, the prayer of Nehemiah. But before I look too deeply at that passage, we need to understand Nehemiah. Last week, if you were with us, we looked at Daniel, the man Daniel who spent his life in Babylon. He was a servant, a slave really, of the Babylonian king. Never really was free. He spent his entire life looking back at the way his parents had it when they were in Israel, right? We know the story. They were taken out of Jerusalem, taken to Babylon as slaves. Nehemiah is actually, we don't think of this when we read through the Bible. It's hard to because we're so separated by so many years. But Nehemiah was probably a teenager when Daniel was an old man. He's a little bit younger, but they lived in the same time frame. There's no question the two were alive at the same time, and Nehemiah was just a lot younger, probably a teenager. And by the way, please hear me when I say that. Young people, little ones, listen up just for a minute. Pay attention, because this is huge. We live in a world where you might believe that you can't do anything significant until you're, in your 50s. And that people don't want you to do anything because, you got to learn the ropes. Listen. Nehemiah has a book named after him in the Bible, and he began a life of significance, and he did massive things that we're going to talk about when he was a teenager. So don't waste these years, young people. Don't waste them scrolling TikTok or, being pouty, or give your life to something right now that is significant, because it will matter, and you matter right now, and you can make a difference right now. Nehemiah did, and I'm going to tell you what he did. Before I look at this text, you need to know where it's going. He begins by looking back. Okay, let me do that. Before what Brad read for us, somebody came to Nehemiah, and this is what he said. The people in Jerusalem, the remaining people there, this is in verse 3 of chapter 1, who had survived the exile, it's in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. Nehemiah begins by looking back. And this is in chapter 1. The prayer that Nehemiah prays is not going to be a whole lot different from the prayer we looked at last week that Daniel prayed, where he begins weeping and he begins mourning and he's looking back. But Nehemiah is praying because he's also looking forward. Nehemiah has a hope and a vision for the future and what's going to happen. Let me go ahead and spoiler alert you where his life is going. Nehemiah will end up going back to Jerusalem, this young man, and leading the people there to rebuild the walls of the city. Walls were very important in the ancient world. It was protection, it was safety, it was security, it was status. And he will go back and spend his life rebuilding what was lost in a new way, in a different way. It's not exactly what was there before. The height, right, of Jerusalem, the height of the nation of Israel, was King David and King Solomon, and these united. It was the only time, two kings, the only time the whole nation was united under one king. Two kings in a row, but that was it. And after Solomon, the kingdom split, and things began to degrade, and they're always looking back, and Nehemiah sees that and is going to rebuild something that is worth having. Something new, something different, but he's looking forward. There's a tendency, I think, to look back and grieve. Look back at what we've lost. Some of us, maybe you're here. We look back, if you've been a Christian, if you were evangelical Christian, say, or maybe even part of BCC in the 80s and 90s, big evangelism explosion movements happen right here. Young Life had like 100 kids meeting in a basement, something like that at one point. I mean, that was the heyday, right? Some of us might even remember, when the guy down the street wouldn't mow his grass on Sundays because everybody in the neighborhood was going to shame him for it, right? Because the culture was such that, you respect the Lord's Day, and people didn't not respect it, right? We remember when you didn't have to have parental controls on the TV unless you were afraid of Elvis shaking a little bit, right? Maybe we look back fondly and we go, oh, those were the days. I mean, there are things we could look back and say they weren't. But it's fair if you look back and go, yeah, things were better then. Nehemiah did that. The people did that. But Nehemiah didn't stop there. He looked forward and he said, here's what it could be. And the first thing he did, and this is what's important, the first thing he did is he prayed. The first thing he did was he prayed. Can I say what I said? I can say it, can I? Can I say what I said at the leadership team? Just came out when we were meeting, and I made them quote me. We put it in the email. We put it in the minutes, the top of the minutes, actually, from our leadership team meeting this past week. You're going to have to excuse me, parents, but this is what it said. This is from our minutes. It's in our minutes. It said, pray first, stupid. That's what it said. That's because we need to be reminded both to pray first and that we sometimes are. So that's what Nehemiah did. He turns first to pray, and then he prays what Brad read for us. I'm going to read it again and just kind of talk through as we go, because I think, we can't hear it enough. Somebody comes and they tell him, right, that it's all a mess back there. Things are not what they used to be. And as soon as I heard these words, I sat down and I wept. And I mourned for days. And I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. The first thing he did was he wept. He mourned. He lamented. We this is something else, by the way. Just got to point this out. Something that I don't think people who are shaped by evangelicalism broadly do well. We don't mourn well. We don't grieve. In fact, we avoid grief as much as possible because we want things to be clean, we want things to be pretty, we want things to be nice, and we don't like it when they're messy and dirty and ugly, but life is. And we need to be people who learn to look at what isn't right and honestly grieve it, to actually say out loud to people, this is not the way it should be, and it hurts, and I don't like it. Something we need to do. Something I'm trying to get better at. My life is not what it ought to be. It's not what I had hoped. It's not. When I adopted a kid 20 years ago, I did not think that he would be where he is today, living in a camper somewhere, using drugs. That was not what it should have been. And yet it is, and I grieve that. Sorry if that's messy, but it's my reality. We need to do that. That's something that we all of us need to get better at. Lamenting, at grieving, at weeping and mourning for days, fasting and praying before the God of heaven. And then Nehemiah's prayers recorded. And look at what he does. We saw this last week. The first thing he does, I said, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. The first thing he does, again, Nehemiah doesn't fall on his face and say, oh God, help me to do this. He doesn't do that. He says, God, this is who you are. Nehemiah begins his prayer with the nature, the character, the person of God. This is who you are. What does he say? Steadfast love. Keeps covenant. He's faithful. Some of us, we need to hear this. This may be a little bit of an aside, but I know we have a tendency, I do, even my own heart, I think all of us probably have this tendency to, when we think of who God is, we might think a little bit angry, a little bit judgmental, a little bit vengeful. And he is vengeful. And he can be angry. He's a person like us, right? and we think we gotta get rid of this thing. I bet you most of us have something going on in our heads, in our hearts, with our hands, in our lives, that maybe sometimes makes us feel like, I bet God is disappointed with me. And when Nehemiah comes to God, the first thing he says is, you are faithful and you have steadfast love. That is a pursuing love. This kind of love that chases you down for your own good. So when there are those things, right, those things that might make us think incorrectly, God is disappointed in me, what you're feeling is love. I mean, if you've got kids or ever babysat, maybe you get this, right? Maybe a little take a 3 or 4-year-old on Halloween. Man, they just want to, right? I got all this bag of candy. I'm just going to unwrap and shove it. Go, 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 right? But I mean, if you love your kids, and maybe if we're honest, some of us parents, we just love ourselves and we wanted to sleep that night. But you know that kid is going to be miserable from shoveling all that candy in their face. And so out of love, you take it and say, that's enough for tonight, maybe tomorrow, right? And then, of course, some of us, I remember, we hit it after the kids go to bed. That may not be quite as much as loving as God, but that's what he does, right? But that's steadfast love, the kind of that hunts us down for our own good. So when you're feeling, gosh, God must be disappointed, first of all, you're absolutely wrong. Know that. Steadfast love is not disappointed, but it is trying to shape you for your own good so you don't get a stomachache. There is that difference, and we need to orient our heads around God's character and nature is not to be angry and disappointed in us like some of our earthly fathers maybe, right? No, his nature and character is to love us for our own good and our own benefit. That's who he is. Just a little aside I needed to point out because I know some of us struggle with that. Then he does this thing that I am incredibly uncomfortable with. Verse 6, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayers of your servant. And now I now pray before you day and night. Nehemiah is telling God to pay attention. Let your ears be attentive. Hear what I'm saying. I wrestle with this kind of thing. I do. Because he is pleading with God to hear him. And I come from a background, I come from a place where I'm like, if I sneeze, God hears me. Do I need to tell God, hey, over here? I don't like that. I'm uncomfortable with that. Why? But, again, I think it comes back to remembering what we said last week. I'm reminded of Brennan Manning's quote. Over and over in the series, I am reminded of what that line that Brennan Manning said, we are all beggars at the door of God's mercy. And sometimes we don't, in our own hearts, align ourselves up with God as if we actually are. Maybe we come a little entitled. Maybe we come a little bit like, hey, you're supposed to help me out. Hey, you were all about giving me the good life. Where's it at? We kind of approach that way. And the Old Testament people, when they prayed, they did not pray that way. They prayed, God, please hear what I'm saying. Listen to me. He is begging for God to listen. And I think that's something I could learn from. I'm trying, and it's not easy. But I think I need to learn how to come before God and say, God, please listen, because I don't know. Right? That sort of desperation, I think, is what we need. Hear the prayer of your servant. And then he goes, we saw this again too, to confession. We have sinned against you. I and my father's house have sinned. We've acted corruptly against you. We've not kept. And he goes into this litany of things that we're just messed up about. I was reminded of a format for prayer that I used to use sometimes, and I do think it's helpful, and it's kind of here. It's called ACTS, ACTS, like the book of the Bible, but unrelated. But that stands for adoration. You adore, you recognize who God is. Starts with His character. This is who you are. You're faithful. You pursue us with steadfast love. C is confession. This is the next thing we do. We recognize, and we've done it. We did it today. We recognize that we fall short. We are aware of our shortcomings. So many of us do that generically. We're aware of our shortcomings. We don't see our own toxicity maybe as quickly as we wish we did. Or maybe we don't wish we did. We do look for our own fame. We do protect our reputations. That's why we say, oh, I'm kind of a mess, and not, I messed up a lot when my kid was little. That's a lot harder to say. We don't get specific, but maybe we should. We do protect our reputations. And we do live out of fear more than we live by trust. And what are some of the ways that you do that? What are some of the ways I do that? Maybe even 401ks, maybe savings accounts. I don't know. I'm not saying savings is a bad idea. But maybe there's some fear and lack of trust in the way that we handle our money. Maybe there's fear and lack of trust in the way that we handle our time. Maybe there's fear and lack of trust in the way that we handle raising our children. How do we live out of fear rather than trust? Be honest about it. Tell God. Thanksgiving is the next one. Adoration, confession, thanksgiving. We thank God. And then supplication, which is a big fancy word for asking for stuff, which comes last, and I think that's the point. It comes last. And it comes last here in Nehemiah. The last thing he does, of course, he's going to plead more in verse 11. Let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant, as if once isn't enough, and maybe it's not. But the only thing he asks God to do is to be faithful. He says to God, remember. That's what he says, verse 8. Remember what you said to Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you. But if you return to me, keep my commandments, though you are outcasts in the utmost parts of the heaven, I will gather them and bring them to the place that I have chosen. I will bring them back. Remember what you said. Remember, God, to be faithful and keep your word. That's what he asks God to do. To bring them back. He starts by weeping and mourning and lamenting what is lost and what is gone. And he begins his life journey of being a significant catalyst in the rebuilding and reshaping of a new Jerusalem by prayer and by looking forward. Gather us, bring us home, gather us back. It's fascinating, really, and I wasn't thinking of this when we met. Our elders and deacons met this past Monday night, talk about stuff and make sure I'm not crazy. Our church government style is Presbyterian, which means we have elders and deacons that sort of run the church. And I often tell people I'm a Presbyterian by that government because I know what a mess I am. I would not do well in one of those churches where the pastor's word sort of rules everything. That would not be good for anybody. Of course, I don't think it is good for anybody, but that's beside the point. But when we met this past Monday night, I hadn't read Nehemiah yet. After we met, I sat down that night after you all went home. I sat down and just read the book. kind of see where we were going today, because I knew we were going to be in this prayer. And it dawned on me that something I had shared was significant to the story of Nehemiah and to where this whole thing goes. Dennis, can you put that picture I sent you on the screen? Thank you. That's a sheet over a porcupine. No. It's a bell curve, and I literally drew it, so that's why it's shaped funny. Don't worry about any of that. Don't worry about the shape. Some of you know what a bell curve is. It's a growth chart. That's what it is. And all organizations really, all nations, as a matter of fact, because that's what Nehemiah is looking at, is his nation, have a certain life cycle. Call it a life cycle. That's the best word for it. Organisms go through this. You have, birth down here, maybe. You have a early stage growth, a late stage growth. Maybe if you're talking about a human being, that's maybe 3 or 4 years old, and then say 4 to 10, and 10 to 18, and then this middle part is like strong career, right? Right there at the peak, things are rolling. You're doing well. College and beyond, right? And then maybe this downhill slope is maintaining. I don't know, I'm not there yet, but maybe there's this phase in a career where it's like I'm just holding on to retirement. I don't know if that's true or not. But now I'm talking about, I remember this bit, right? I don't know that bit. But then you have, your decline and ultimate death. This is the life cycle of any organization. It's the way it works. Israel, the nation of Israel, getting out of Exodus, leaving Egypt, going to the promised land. Judges, the early growth, kind of bringing everybody together. David becomes king. Solomon becomes king. Wise people are coming from everywhere to see all the great things Solomon's doing. Solomon dies, the kingdom splits. Good kings, bad kings, right? Things are not going well, and then Babylon comes and sweeps them away. It's the life cycle of anything. And we talked about this, and we said, it's kind of the life cycle of a church. It is. Anything, you've got your launch, your early stage growth, your kind of more strategic, you might call it, growth when you're planning and organizing everything. Then you got the height, the programs, and everything's rolling along, and man, it's booming, and things look great. And then you've got this maintenance stage where we're just trying to hold on to that for as long as we can, and then it begins to slip away. And I asked, well, where do you think we are as a church body? And I get it. If you've been around for a while, you might think we're down at this second or third to the last dash on that way out. And I get it. And I think Nehemiah, when he looked at his people, that's probably what he was tempted to think too. And then I think he said no. Tom pointed out at our meeting that these things can come in waves that overlap each other, and I didn't draw that. But as you're on the downhill, right, things look like they're gone, you get a catalyst like a Nehemiah who says, no, it doesn't have to just end. New life can be given to that. We're not actually over there. And that's what I said to our leaders. We're not over here. We're over there. It's about how you look at it. See, we can look back and we can go, oh, those were the good old days. Gee whiz. Things were rolling along and so good, and now we're just, We can do that. Or we can look and we can go, no, we've gotten rid of a lot of that weight. And now we've got people and energy and new life. And we had 25 kids in the discipleship class last Sunday, and things are rolling. We are good. And we can look forward. Nehemiah looked forward. And the first thing he did was pray. He prayed. He recognized who God was. He confessed the failures of his and his people's pasts, of trusting in the wrong things, of believing that having an organization at the top of the bell curve actually matters. Maybe that's something to confess. And then he prayed, God, be faithful to your people. That's what we can do. We can believe this, that we are on the front, not the back of this curve, and we can pray. Questions, just some food for thought, some things to think about. Where do you imagine, at least when I first talked about, where you imagine that this church is on that bell curve? What could our future be? What might it be? What could it be? Do you look into the future of this church and see, I don't know, selling the building to a funeral home? Or do you look at it as a thriving ministry in South Bismarck? And then my third question is, will you pray even to the point of begging God and confessing and begging and confessing and begging God for that future? For a thriving ministry right here in South Bismarck to all kinds of people. And will we beg God for that? And will we say, God, be attentive to what we are saying? Can we commit to that? Do we want to commit to that? Or would we rather be like people that Nehemiah will encounter in his whole life, who will just kind of sit around and go, man, it sure used to be nice? We have a choice. And I think, if we're honest, we only have one good choice. We only have one right choice. And it's to pray, and it's to beg God, and it's to confess, and it's to look forward. Yes, we can mourn, and we should lament whatever we've lost, whatever's gone, whatever the good old days were to you, whatever they were. It's okay to mourn them, but it's not okay to wish it was that and not look forward and pray and be about bringing a new and better future. That's what Nehemiah does. And he would give his life to. And I think we can too. Let me pray for us. God, you are a covenant-keeping God. You are faithful. You are faithful to your people. You have steadfast love. Would you help me and all of us to believe that and to hear that and to know that you are about loving us and healing us and not leaving us in our mess. You're all about making things better. Help us to feel your love. Help us to feel your acceptance in spite of the fact that we are maybe not all that we should be. God, hear our prayer. Be attentive. Remind us that we need to be coming to you and saying, God, please listen. Listen. Would you make our future brighter than our past? And there are things in our past that we grieve and mourn, and things that are lost, things that aren't the way they should be. And help us to grieve those things well. But Jesus, you are an example that the future is supposed to be better than the past. Life comes out of death. God, hear what we are praying and bring new life out of the death of the past. Please be attentive to our prayer. It's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
Hello. I think we